Ladies and gentlemen of Australia, the sovereign people of Australia, and indeed the sovereign people of the world, I'm Lord Coyle, and I'd like to talk to you about the realities of money. Money is anything that is accepted as an exchange for goods. Currently, Australia is running under a debt-based economy, and as a result we have a high level of foreign debt. But I need to ask, and we need to ask as a nation, who do we owe money to, and what was it that we borrowed? Our government currently says we owe money to overseas interests, but they don't say what it was we borrowed, and we haven't heard anybody say what it was we borrowed. Did we borrow drachmas? Did we borrow gold? Did we borrow silver? Did we borrow US dollars? Did we borrow Chinese yuan? What was it that we borrowed? Did we borrow just digits on a computer? What was it that we borrowed? This is a serious question that needs to be asked of our government. What was it that we borrowed? If we're in debt, we must have borrowed something. And what was it that we borrowed? I find it hard to believe that from a foreign entity we can borrow Australian dollars. So what was it that we borrowed? We must have borrowed something and then converted it to Australian dollars, perhaps. It is an interesting question, and I think that the government should be forced by the people, by the will of the people, should be forced to answer the question, because once we know what it is that we owe, then we need to know how to go about paying that debt once and for all. We were never in a debt-based economy until after the Great Depression. In the 1920s and prior to the 1920s, from 1901 right through till the 1920s, Australia, through the help of the Commonwealth Bank, which was founded in 1912, or 1911 actually, we borrowed money as a government for infrastructure from the Commonwealth Bank, but in an actual effect the money was printed on a printing press in mints throughout Australia. The Melbourne Mint, the Sydney Mint, the Perth Mint. I believe we even had a mint in Brisbane. And that money was then used to pay construction workers and other workers and pay for raw materials to produce the infrastructure that we required. Then, once that money was circulated through the Australian economy, it ended up back into the reserves, and the excess amount was drawn off and destroyed. But the infrastructure was completed successfully. Everyone was happy, everyone got paid, and the government and the country grew as a result, and it became wealthy. We paid for the Transcontinental Railroad. We paid for our World War I debt. It was a high cost of going to war in 1914, and by 1919 we had our debt paid. How? Sir Denison Miller explained in London that we printed the money. We paid for the steel, we paid for the wool, we paid for all of the necessary goods that would be needed for our troops to go to war and to bring them back. And this system of printing the money for infrastructure worked successfully until on the scene came a central bank. The moment that the printing press went out of the hands of the government into a central bank, which board is controlled by multinationals, including one member from the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, we were able to take care of our own business. But once that printing press landed into their hands, we were a slave to foreign debt. We need to end that slavery. Generations of university students have gone through university brainwashed into believing that if you print money for infrastructure you will create superinflation. This is not the case. It only occurs if the printing press is in the foreign hands and you are creating more and more debt. The punishment for a government printing money when the printing press is in the hands of the foreign multinationals. The foreign multinationals own so many companies that they are able to increase the cost of supplies to other companies who rely on those goods to make their products, such as motor vehicles and refrigerators, washing machines and other goods that require suppliers to supply the necessary components. If those prices for those suppliers go up, then the prices of the goods that they produce must go up. And the other factor that comes into play there is the prices go up, the workers require higher wages. And then when they get higher wages, guess what? The prices go up. So this is a cycle that can be broken by the government reclaiming the printing press. But the government is run by people who in many cases are dubiously elected and are in place, and in most cases they haven't got a very high education, and if they have got a education, it is a brainwashed education because they do not understand how money works. The simplest form of explaining the simplicity of how money should work and can work is told in the simple story of a man walked into a hotel, wished to stay 2 nights. He said to the manager of the hotel, "I wish to stay 2 nights, how much will that be?" And the manager said, "That will be $100. So the gentleman said, "Okay, but I want to inspect the room first. I'm very fussy and I will not stay at a hotel that I'm not happy with the room, so I will take at least half an hour inspecting the room thoroughly. In good faith, I will leave a $100 note on the counter, and if I am happy with the room, you keep the $100 note and issue me a receipt. If I am not, I will collect the $100 note and I will leave." The hotel manager agreed. The man went upstairs. The moment the man went upstairs, the hotel manager raced out of the hotel, left the junior in charge, and raced across the street to the hardware store where he had an account that he had run up to the value of $100. He paid the hardware store owner the $100, feeling very certain that the hotel room would pass inspection. Times were tough, so many things had to be put on the tick. The hotel manager happened to owe the butcher shop $100, so he raced down the street with that $100 note and paid the butcher shop. The butcher wrote out a receipt and cleared the debt. The butcher happened to be a bit of a sacco. He raced across the street to the local prostitute who had put him on the tick and paid her the $100 that he owed her. And she thanked him, and he went back to the butcher shop. The prostitute, who had also was short on money, even though it's the oldest profession, she was living day to day and trick to trick, so she raced up to the hotel owner, who let her use his rooms from time to time, and she owed him $100 for the use of the rooms, and she gave him the $100 note, and he placed the $100 note back on the counter. The businessman came down from the rooms and after the inspection and said no, he wasn't happy with the rooms, he wanted something better. So he collected the $100 note, put it back in his wallet and walked out. And that's how money works. The banks do not loan you anything. They loan you digits. They transfer digits from their master computer into your account. Yes, you get temporary access to the cash, which is known as fiat currency, because it's not backed by anything in Australia, it's only issued by the Treasury. And they go and purchase something, but guess what? At the end of the day, after they've purchased something with that cash ends up back into the hands of the bank. So the bank still has the cash, but it has a number of people who are indebted to it. What a deal. It is a very long and complex subject to talk about money and how it all works. I can't do that on this video, but what I can say is that we need to ask our government questions, and I intend to set up a show which will bring in people from around Australia, experts on various subjects, and also we want to bring in ordinary people, and the show's going to be called The People's Question Time, and that show will not only be broadcast on the web, but it will also be sent to various politicians. One of the things that will be taught on that show will be how to operate commerce correctly and how the people can operate commerce. This country has been taken over and was actually originally under the control of Admiralty, and under Admiralty law this country was secured. That is why when the British Navy first laid the British flag down on Australian soil, it chose to ignore the people who were on the shore waving their spears at the time, and it declared that the land actually didn't have anyone living on it at all. After all, it was right up until 1967 that the well-established Australian government still considered the Aboriginal people to be counted with the cattle in the census. They didn't get the right to even be recognised as human beings until the 60s, when they were given the right to vote. Anyway, I digress. But the country was taken under Admiralty law, and one of the first tricks that the British government did under Admiralty law was to declare the native people Aboriginal. But they did not explain that the English language is used very, very cleverly and with dead accuracy, and the English language translation of the word Aboriginal explains that it uses Latin. The word Aboriginal consists of two words: ab, which means away from and not, and original. So the moment the natives of this country started calling themselves Aboriginals, they were then going to courts asking for rights as being original inhabitants. But they went to the courts saying, I am not original, but I want original rights. And the courts were saying, well, if you're not original, we're not going to give you original rights. Go away. And that is why the Australian originals, as I call them, should be dropping the word ab from their language and simply call themselves either originals or, as they choose to do these days, Indigenous. But Indigenous doesn't exclude anyone else. Anyone who's actually born of a particular country is Indigenous. That is another messy subject, which again I digress from the original subject of money. But the Admiralty law still overrules all other laws in this country. The English language is used to dead accuracy, and terminology is very vitally important in the determination of cases in courts. You may have observed barristers and QCs and judges and police during the throes of a court case give certain nods and give certain signals. You may not have observed that, but that is what occurs. And those signals often are signals used in Admiralty law. Terminologies don't always mean exactly what you think they mean. You ask a politician today, what is the legal definition of the word vote? And he'll be at pains to tell you the correct definition. Because any wise politician, when you ask that question, will avoid it like the plague, because he knows that if he answers the question correctly, he will be admitting that he is most likely going to be elected by an act of fraud. Because the legal definition of the word vote means an indication of the person's will by the raising of a hand, or an indication of their will by the A mark on a piece of paper. And notice that all of those words are premised by the singular, not the plural. The Australian Constitution says that the people shall only vote once in a general election. Therefore, first past the post is the only legal constitutional form of voting. Preferential voting was brought in to keep the two major parties in power. And I will go into the fraud that takes place in the counting of the ballot papers at a later date. Back onto money. Money is used these days to enslave people, and the country is rapidly moving towards a cashless society. I cannot emphasize how important it is that we do not lose our cash. Again, the Australian government has breached the Australian Constitution. The Australian Constitution, section 115, says quite clearly that states shall not coin money, nor make anything other than gold and silver as legal tender in the discharge of debts. The discharging of debts must be done in gold and silver. Yet, up until 1966, this was perfectly constitutional, because the states didn't coin money, but they used gold and silver to discharge debts. In fact, we used it nationally. We had copper, silver and gold as our normal monetary currency. We also had notes, but initially when those notes were printed, they said that the notes were exchangeable for 1/2 sovereign or 1 sovereign, depending on whether it was a 10-shilling note or a £1. We lost those promises of the notes. We've lost all promises of the notes, other than to say that the government claims that those notes are legal tender. But it does not say that the notes are legal tender to discharge debt. And that's another can of worms. We lost the silver, we lost the gold. We now have what's known as fiat currency, which is currency issued by the Treasury. Well, technically issued by the Treasury, that's what the term fiat means. Now, we have plastic rubbish. It's not backed by anything. And the country is running a debt-based economy. We own foreign multinationals and we owe them billions of dollars. The government could take control of the printing press back into the hands of the Australian society and issue its monetary policy, its fiscal policy, as the word fiscal means from the Treasury. Its policy needs to be brought back into the hands of the Treasury. Its issuance of its dollar needs to be brought back into the hands of the government. The printing press needs to be Australian owned, and we need to print money for infrastructure. We have the right, we were given the right by the people of Australia, the sovereign people of Australia. And that's another story. What is the sovereign person? I will talk about that at a later date. But we are. Those of us, any of us, who are an Australian-born, Australian citizen who have not sworn an oath of office are sovereign people. Anyone who has sworn an oath of office are servants. And that's another story that I can let you know all about at a later date. Suffice to say that we need to really understand how money works, and I intend to do a series of talks on how money works so that we can appreciate the problems that we are facing. We are going into the greatest depression that this country has ever seen in history, and it is being perpetrated by the very money masters who are in control of our money. I look forward to organising the question time series and hope that you will join us on the web, on our web page, once it's set up. Call back to this channel and you will see updates, and then we will go through a series of talks with various people on why Australia is in the trouble that it's in and how to solve its problem, including taxation. Thank you.